I encourage people, don't compare the WNBA to where the league is now after, 80 years, essentially. Compare it to where the NBA was the first 30 years of its existence.
It's like their
the
brains
WNBA
break and they can't do it. Welcome back, everybody. We are here with another episode of A Touch More, a special birthday edition for our little Sue Bird.
Not little anymore.
Not little anymore. We have a little surprise planned for Sue, so stay tuned for that. I'm sure
Little Sue doesn't like surprises.
She doesn't?
No.
Does she kind of, though?
I hated birthday parties growing up.
I don't know. You might like this one.
Okay.
And today we're going to have a friend stop by for a very timely chat. We'll be hosting sports journalist Jemele Hill, and we're going to play a little bench start cut with her as well. So excited to have Jemele on. Big fan, and such an important voice in our sports landscape, but honestly, just like our cultural landscape. But we're going to start with the check-in. Support for A Touch More comes from L'Oreal Paris, who recently announced their 2024 Women of Worth honorees. Later in the episode, we're going to share some super inspiring stories from the alumni of the program. So stick around and hear more about these incredible women. The WNBA is growing, Sue. We are on the eve of expansion. The expansion draft for the Golden State Valkyries will be held on December 6th. This is the first expansion draft since 2008. Each existing team can protect a maximum of 6 players who will not be eligible to be drafted by the Valkyries. You're going to get into that in a little bit and what exactly that means. Just as a reminder, Toronto is coming in 2026, as well as Portland coming in 2026, which everybody that I know in Portland is very, very excited about this. Sue, first off, how do you feel about this? What are your thoughts about this?
It's exciting. It's exciting. I think the fact that we have 3 teams coming in speaks to so many things: the growth, the success, the interest, the valuations of the franchises is also very exciting. It's everything's trending upwards. So there's really nothing to say, but I'm excited about it.
Okay, let's get into the teams get to protect 6 players in the expansion draft. What does this actually mean? Tell us what this means, because there's a couple exceptions and other things.
Yeah, no, that part is pretty straightforward. I was actually in the league in 2008, so obviously. So I remember very, very well what that was like.
Were you protected?
I was protected.
That's a good move. Yeah.
But the difference is now, so the protection of 6 players just means every team picks 6 players. And I believe the draft is on December 6th, but there is another date, maybe at the close of this season, where between that date and December 6th, some things can happen. I'll circle back on that in a second.
Okay.
But it's as simple as you're protecting the 6 players on your roster that you do not want the Valkyries to have the opportunity to draft.
Okay.
The Valkyries will be able to draft 1 per team, although I want to say they don't even have to draft 1 per team, but that is the maximum per team that they can draft. So yeah, the protection part's pretty self-explanatory. You're probably going to protect the ones you don't want to lose. The end.
Yeah, you're going to protect your starting 5 and your 6th player,
right.
most likely, or whatever.
But the difference between 2008 and now is we have a lot more movement in free agency. We had unrestricted and restricted free agents back then, but the core was a little different, and that's really what's going to come into play here.
What is the core?
Yeah, I'll explain it. Ari Chambers actually did a great job of breaking this down on her social channels. So if you really want a 2-minute breakdown where it's clear and concise, you could definitely check that out. Coring simply means that when a player is coming up to their unrestricted free agency, which means they would have the opportunity to leave and do whatever they want, the team does have the opportunity to core them. Very quickly, each player in the league, based on our last CBA, can only be cored twice in their career. Once you're cored twice, you can no longer be cored. But if you haven't been cored yet, as I said, it gives that team the chance to say, I'm coring you. Now they must pay you the maximum salary. And that's kind of the trade-off. There's other things that can happen after a player gets cored. Honestly, go read the CABA for that.
Yeah.
We ain't got time for that right now.
We don't have time for legal
We're doing
documents here.
we're doing expansion drafts. We
Okay.
don't have time for that. So that's what that means. And the reason why we're bringing up the core is because within this moment where teams are going to assess their rosters and assess who they want to protect, if there is a player, and there happens to be a Seattle Storm player that falls into this category, so we're going to use Neko Ogwumike as the example.
Madam President.
If there is a player who is approaching their free agency and will be unrestricted, but has been cored already in their career 2 times, therefore cannot be cored again, that player does not have to be protected because the Valkyries essentially can't take them. Why would you take a player that if you took them, they could just leave anyways and there's nothing you could do about it, right? So it's a little bit of a loophole for a team like Seattle, probably for other teams, I'd have to check it out, where they can protect 6 and don't really have to protect Nneka.
But they have to be able to re-sign her.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Nneka just gets her free agency.
Okay.
That's really all it's saying.
Got it.
Is
So it's
that
a way to
these
protect players' free agency once they've earned it.
Of course. It's
Okay.
also a way to protect the Valkyries from, I guess, wasting a pick on a player
getting
that
someone and then they don't want to come. Okay.
So the only other thing I would add to this is, as I said, there is a date that comes at the end of the season. It's approaching, obviously. Between now and December 6th, there are trades that can happen. The Valkyries and other teams can do trades, and you can essentially, send them a 2nd-round pick or maybe even players, I would assume. But yeah, you can send them something and then say, but you can't pick this unprotected player from my
side
roster.
Deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, this happens a lot. This has happened a lot in the NWSL because we have allocation money and we have international spot. There's a lot of beep, boop, bopping that happens on the side, which I'm into. I feel like it's a fun little game of like watch the GMs work and like see how they work and see sort of like what deals can be done. It's interesting and fun. I like
test them all out. It's going to test them all out.
Good
So that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of it. Yeah, there's some other stuff that you could discuss. We still don't know where they're going to fall in the college draft, if we want to call it the college draft, the WNBA draft. I think the priority 1,000% has to be on player development. Because if things continue to trend the way they're trending, which is 2026 CBA comes, the salaries will increase by a lot. It's going to change the dynamic on who goes overseas, if they go overseas. There's an influx of player, which I'm just going to call it how I see it. There is a little bit of a dilution that can happen within the league when all of a sudden you have, I guess next year it will be an influx of 12, but then
3 more teams.
Yeah, then there's going to be 24 more players in. So it's going to dilute the league a little bit. With this new amount of players that's coming in, maybe they don't go overseas as much. And I think player development is going to be so important. I'm talking off season.
Yeah, what do you mean by player development?
Development. Literally just that. If players are going to be getting paid enough to stay in the WNBA and not go overseas, which I don't mean to highlight this in a negative, but shout out to Nika Mule. Sadly, just tore her ACL. It was gut-wrenching to hear the audio.
Our League Fits Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I know. So that was really difficult to listen to. But in a couple years, those are going to be, I think players are going to be asking themselves, what's the risk and reward? If I'm making a lot in the WNBA, do I want to risk certain things overseas in terms of injury? There's going to be some players, and Nika actually fell into this category this year of like, oh no, I need to go play.
Yeah.
I didn't get a lot of playing
minutes,
time.
yeah.
I need to go play. I need to go refine my game, work on some things, but also just play. So it's just, there's going to be a lot of balls in the air for players in terms of making these decisions. But for those that stay, okay, and when I bring up the diluting of the league, really what I mean is a lot of people make the argument that because there aren't roster spots, it's really hard to make this league, which is true. And so there's just like this pool of talent out there that's not getting a chance. And while sometimes that's the case, there's also going to be a scenario where some players that, aren't of the WNBA level are now going to be in the WNBA. And so you have to develop those players. And I don't mean to sound as a knock on them. This is just the reality.
It's like this has to happen first in order to like build the pool of players that in, 5, 10, 15, 20 into the future of the WNBA, then you can actually really build the pool of players.
Yeah.
If I were, it's like we have to do this before. It's not like that pool of players can like be developed and then you're like, okay, they're ready. So now we can do another expansion team. It kind of has to come
I also think the mindset of teams has to change. When I worked in the NBA, with the Nuggets, I got, a courtside seat to how they operate. And a lot of times the NBA, because of their roster spot numbers, because of the teams, all the things, they're able to draft on potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then they develop those players and they get to see it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always in the WNBA, when you do that, get to see the other side because
Yeah.
it's such a tight roster, because it's a hard salary cap, all the reasons. So now if you can pick a player based on potential and develop them and see that reward after 2, 3, 4 years, that the teams that I think invest in that are in a long-term way are gonna be positively impacted.
And
I think you'll be able to take that talent that hasn't been WNBA level talent and make them that. You're going to benefit from that. That's what I'm saying.
And when we hear the terms like, did they make the leap? Did they make the sophomore leap? Did they make the jump? That's why they're able to make it, is because of the player development. So you're saying like training in the off season, like they can use the practice facilities. They can, have access to, all the training, basically all the things that they have access to during the season. And then specifically with the player development coaches, they can have that access specifically to their game all year. That's like the holistic version of player development that
It's
you're talking
literally
about.
taking players that are now going to be in the league that when the league was at 12 teams, wouldn't have been able to make a roster, but now they're going to be in the league. And can you take that player and develop that talent and get more from that player?
Mhm.
Because teams that are able to do that are going to have access to their entire roster, not just have to cut, only play 7 or 8 players. They're going to be able to go 9, 10, 11, 12
Yeah.
deep.
I mean,
it's like literally that simple.
Even when we played, the amount of times that it was like, okay, where are you going to get gym time? And where am I going to get field time? And where are we going to find a pool?
But that's not even a question anymore. Everybody
right, but
has
that's now
access
going to be available and provided to players on a 12-month basis, on a year-round basis.
That already exists. That already exists. Yeah,
does it for every team?
I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of every team, but yes, that is already like in place. That's something that teams already know. And I'm saying, and you might even have to invest in what coaches are you hiring?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, something else I think I have my eye on is, does this increase in salary, the combination of increase in salary and expansion, lead to more European players coming over here, right? And I know we're going to deep dive some of the things that Gabby Williams has said. I know in my experience, you have a player, I think Emma Messiman falls into this category where I think players want to play in the WNBA because the competition is so great. It's in America. That's a draw. But the financials of it didn't always work out, right? So if the financials don't work out for a top player, it's not going to work out for a European player who might not be of the same caliber as an Emma Messiman and Gabby Williams. So I wonder, with the increase in both roster and salary, do you now have an influx of international players coming in? So I also have my eye on that. I think all of this happening at the same time, the expansion and the CBA, it leads to for me, just a curiosity around all these things. And I guess that brings me to you, because you've already mentioned with the NWSL, you have had expansion. You've been a part of it. What do you think players need to keep in mind? The players need to keep in mind as the league grows.
I mean, I think from like a player union perspective, to our point about player development and all that, like continuing to ensure that the players are provided an environment where they can grow and continue to learn and develop and be supported on a 12-month basis. I mean, I know the WNBA season is shorter, but also the owners of the WNBA wanted prioritization. So they want players to stay here. They don't want players to go overseas. So insofar as you don't want them to go overseas,
they don't want them to be late.
Sure. But, ergo. They don't want them to be late, but, then they have to come back early, and so they need to provide these opportunities.
But a lot of the teams now end before the WNBA starts.
Okay. I think for soccer, we don't, no players sort of play in both leagues, and so, and our seasons are longer, so even if it's just that 3 months, I think it's really important to make sure that it's, either codified in the CBA that you have access to training fields and gyms and trainers and medical and all of that. I think it's really interesting. I was looking at the W unrestricted free agents going into next season, and there's 2 things happening with the W. Is one, there's the expansion coming, and all these unrestricted free agents, but also the CBA is up next year, or you guys are going to opt out of the CBA. So like that's good. So this is going to be like really interesting. So I say for players, it's kind of a unique opportunity to either do like a let me try this year, or stay where you are this year, or treat it as a contract year. Like you kind of have an opportunity to be like, if you're an unrestricted free agent, like where do you want to go? And you might have an opportunity to take a risk that you normally wouldn't. I think for players too, I mean, it's always on you to continue to develop. There will be more opportunities for players. So probably like, let's just say not the 144. Let's just say the 36 players, if it's, 12 from 12 teams in the next 3 years, are kind of those 36 players. You better be dribbling a ball right now, and you better be like,
Oh, no.
those players have a huge opportunity
When
from
expansion
going to
got announced-
not being in the league at all to you have an opportunity to be in the league. Even the players, maybe like the non-starters in the league, some of those players are going to be starters on teams. So that's a really cool opportunity, I think, for players.
When
to
expansion got
get more playing
announced, there
time.
was a bunch of players who are kind of just like on the cusp,
Yeah.
who didn't make a team this year and were
Mhm.
right there, who were like, oh, they were hyped. They were like, oh, now, like, I'm going to have an opportunity now.
Yeah.
Like, they know it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I mean, I think there's always going to be growing pains. There is dilution. All of a sudden having 36 more players in the league in the next 2 years that weren't good enough to play in the league previously. There's going to be a jump for them, and there's going to, be
No, there is. I know. I kind of want to backtrack a little bit on the dilution of it all, because I think that can be misconstrued. It can
as
be
a negative
misconstrued.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just when you expand, like clearly these players didn't make these rosters.
It's a reality.
So it's kind of just like what it
Yeah.
is. It doesn't have to be a negative. It's
Yeah.
kind of just, it's a growing pain.
Yeah. And we've talked about this. It's like, and I mentioned it before, but it's like build it and they will come. Like
the same thing would happen in any league with expansion is really
100%.
if you added 3 teams in 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like super teams. It'll be interesting to see if there's a place for the super team, if you will, in the WNBA after 2026.
Yeah.
Because you already brought this up, so I'm just gonna double down on it. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is gonna sign more than 1 year. Any free agent this
No.
year will not sign more than 1 year because of the CBA.
Yeah.
When 2026 comes around, the entire league will be free agents except for people on their rookie deals. I don't even know, like, how does that even work? I don't, to the GMs, like,
GMs assemble.
good luck.
Yeah.
It's going
I
to be
know.
tough. I don't
Yeah.
even know how that's going to work.
Yeah. I know. I'm looking
It's gonna
forward
be
to it. I'm gonna
crazy.
be watching that like a
Wild,
reality show.
wild
Just like,
west.
woo.
But
They're
back to
gonna
the
earn
original.
They're going to earn their money and show their chops for show.
Back to the original thought. It is very exciting. It's all good things. And I personally believe the teams that figure it out first, they're gonna get off to a much better start in building a franchise in this new world, this new CBA world, this new expansion world. So
Do
the
you have
teams
a
that figure it
city
out-
that you're most excited about between San Francisco, Toronto, and Portland?
Probably Portland. My answer has nothing to do with the city, what I think the fan base is going to be like, what I think, nothing, literally. So the reason it's Portland is because I was in the league in the Portland Fires last year. So my rookie year was the Portland Fires last year. And I got to play in Portland. We had some big games in Seattle where we played against each other. At one point, we were both fighting for a playoff spot. And I really got to experience what they call the I-5 rivalry. And for me, when Portland, did go away, it was sad because it's a natural rivalry. Seattle and Portland are kind of like these
Cascadia Derby.
Yeah, they're like these sister cities, but I think they like low-key side-eye each other. I personally think Seattle's way more beautiful. Just like,
Oh, yeah, we have all the water. I mean,
better.
we have all the water.
Yeah.
Come on.
What I'm most excited for is for the I-5 rivalry to return. So that is why I'm looking forward to Portland.
I am also looking forward to Portland.
Yeah, you are Portland.
On behalf of
Tell us, Hall of Famer.
Yeah, on behalf,
Tell us, Hall of
that is
Famer.
Right, I'm get my purple jacket out. On behalf of everyone, because I obviously played in Seattle. We had the rivalry with Portland. It was awesome. It was the best thing ever. Like from the jump, it was so much fun, and you have that rivalry. It's also a place you don't have to fly to. amazing.
Yep.
With also, in the NWSL, it's now Portland, there's Utah, there's the Bay Area. Seattle is so far from every single place in the whole entire. It's like a European trip every time you leave the dang state. So I think just from like a player perspective, you're like, oh my God, yes, we're going to the Bay Area, we're going to Portland, and those are basically
for a Seattle
4 trips.
team, absolutely,
2 to 4 trips a year or whatever for Seattle teams. That it's just, and I think it helps create kind of like a regional vibe, and I think it's going to be really exciting for both teams, and obviously, the history of Portland sports fans around women's sports is epic, and I have, no doubt that the Portland Fire or whatever they're going to be called.
Well, that'll be the question, what they get named, but TBD.
I know. We got the Timber, we got the Thorns. Are we going with the nature thing again? I don't know.
I don't know.
They do love nature there.
All right, stay with us. We got a big interview coming up.
Support for A Touch More comes from L'Oréal Paris, who are proudly presenting their 2024 Women of Worth honorees. Like Hillary Cohen, the co-founder and CEO of Everyday Action, a nonprofit that redistributes unused meals to aid those facing food insecurity in Los Angeles. Sharing a meal is about more than just food security. It's about reminding someone they are worthy of safety and care. Or Laura Pahulis, the founder and president of Control-Alt-Delete, a nonprofit that equips crisis response assistance for individuals to escape domestic violence situations. They provide transportation, lodging, hygiene, and grocery assistance, and security measures to aid in the very first steps for domestic violence survivors. In today's episode, and over the coming weeks, you'll hear directly from several of the unbelievable women in the L'Oréal Paris Women of Worth Alumni Network. We will be sharing their stories in their own words directly with you. Let's celebrate these women and let them inspire us to make change in our own communities, because they're worth it. Learn more about this year's recipients at womenofworth.com.
We want to welcome in a friend of ours, Jemele Hill, contributing writer for The Atlantic. Jemele, you have been a journalist for over 20 years. We want to welcome you to the show, but we're going to come in hot. We're coming in hot.
Ooh, I love it. Let's do it.
So looking back on the WNBA's handling of the explosion in interest this season, how would you grade it, assess it, and why?
Well, you almost have to break this report card down by categories in terms of interest level, awareness, increased publicity, conversation around the league. It's been an A. I mean, the WNBA, this season reminds me of when the league first started. And the WNBA, I guess for context, was actually the first professional league I ever covered. I was a general assignment sports reporter in Raleigh, North Carolina, my first job out of college. And the WNBA started basically the same time. So they, at my insistence, they let me go and cover the Charlotte Sting, which were 2 hours away. So I used to go down there and cover them quite a bit. Andrea Stinson, Rhonda Mapp.
Oh, yeah.
I think Dawn Staley paid for that team as well. So that was my first, introduction into covering a professional league. And as you recall, when the league first started, it was so much interest and a lot of publicity, marketing campaigns. It was everywhere. And that was certainly reflected in both the viewership and the attendance. And there have been spurts and pockets since then, for sure. But in terms of a sustained season, like this was something that the WNBA had never seen. So from an awareness standpoint, definitely an A. Media coverage standpoint, I give it about a D. And that is because once again, it was sort of some of the familiar issues we've seen in covering women's sports. Certainly one of my pet peeves, and I wrote about this in The Atlantic, was that you had a lot of people, a lot of male commentators who were not familiar with this space coming into it, kind of treating it not with the expertise that it was required. Like, I'm not saying that every single thing that somebody talks about on television, you have to know everything about it, every bit of history, because certainly I've entered those spaces. And while I may have had base institutional knowledge, I'm not saying that I knew every single thing about that sport. So I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that men sometimes in these spaces, they're afforded automatic gender credibility that women do not get. Like, I couldn't go on anybody's NFL set and say what I didn't know about the sport, be loud about it, and then tell you to take my opinion seriously anyway. Couldn't do it. And because there has been a dearth of coverage, because the coverage of women's sports overall in the media has been very inconsistent, a lot of them were pushing narratives. And I wanted to just simply ask, like, have you talked to any WNBA players? Have you even spoken with any to have this level of confidence in your opinion? And the one thing I would say when I was on TV, sort of regularly regurgitating these hot takes, is that it came from a place of like, oh, I know players in the league. I know what the conversation is. Like, I got it. And I would lean on that, my sources and my institutional knowledge to be able to say something that I thought was like effective and right. And a lot of them weren't. And so because they were running with certain narratives, I thought that it really permeated how this league was seen. And we've seen the dangers of the combination of a media narrative and also social media sort of colliding in ways that I thought made what should have been a fantastic season I won't say the majority of women in the WNBA. I couldn't speak to that, but I think definitely for a significant number of women in the WNBA, which should have been a banner, largely celebratory season, became kind of miserable because of how the coverage was and how that coverage sort of bled over into real life. So I thought that part was particularly distasteful. The other part was the WNBA seemed to be, from a structure and, just from an execution standpoint, it was like they got caught off guard. And that is mind-boggling to me because, they've had enough time to prepare for the arrival of somebody like Caitlin Clark. You could easily look and see, based off what the college ratings were, how fans responded, that this was going to be a really big deal. And some of it they got right, a lot of it got wrong. And frankly, one of the reasons why I think her presence was great, because it exposed the fact that the WNBA has been structurally allowed to get away with a lot of things. And now that you have more scrutiny, you can't get away with those same things. The charter plane issue is just one of those examples. That is something that women in the league, as you know, Sue, have been fighting for forever, right? They've been fighting for this for years. And it was another conversation that came up strongly after Brittany Griner, when she was released from detainment. She faced some security issues with her team. And so there were some concessions made, but it shouldn't have to take somebody being threatened on camera for you to respond. And it was the same with Caitlin Clark, her walking around baggage claim like any other person, and seeing what security issues that creates got the league to sort of act more hastily. And it's like, wow, did it have to take a player's safety to be compromised? Like, you guys have known this was an issue. So like, what are we even doing here? And I guess if you're another player in the league, it's hard not to look at that and say, okay, so my value alone is not worth you doing this. You see something that you consider to be more valuable, and now all of a sudden you want to put things in motion. But and obviously the biggest conversation that we're having as of this recording is about how the league has failed to respond to some of the racist, homophobic attacks that a lot of the players have faced. Now, yes, this does happen across sports. A lot of athletes who are in the limelight, unfortunately, have to face these sorts of things. You both have faced it before, so you understand. But I thought the commissioner's response was woefully lacking. And I just thought, as a league, they just didn't get out in front of it enough to at least try to present the united front of, this is something we don't tolerate and this is something we don't stand for, particularly when you consider what has been the legacy of this league has been of one of being outspoken activists, and I just thought that was just really, really lacking. And so I'm hoping that going forward, now that they've been through these kind of difficult and awkward growing pains, that we will see a far better response from the league in terms of supporting the players that are in the league. And I'm hoping the media grows up, frankly. I mean, that might be too much to hope for, but I'm hoping that they stop treating the success of this league and the sustained interest as an anomaly and a novelty, and treat it like a real league that deserves smart coverage, fair coverage, and, that deserves like really incredible, thoughtful, nuanced storytelling. Like, this league deserves that. And so I'm hoping that the media itself also learned a lesson.
Yeah, there was a great article in the Defector, and basically they asked the question, like, should there be, or should we establish, should the player, I think the players and the Players Association really kind of has, but should the W sort of establish a different sort of set of rules of engagement around how to cover this league in particular? I think women's sports deserves that also, because saying like, oh, this happens in the NFL, so it should be fine here. Where it's like, well, first of all, that's not the style of governance that we want to have. And then, and we know what style of governance that is. But do you think they need like a specific person, almost like, I don't even know, a chief strategist, PR, I don't know, of like understanding all of the isms, the racism and the misogyny and the sexism, and put that as a priority for the league office? Because as we said in our last pod, they are sort of charged with the overall health and safety growth investment of the business. Do you think the WNBA needs something like that at this particular time, because it's only getting more and worse?
I do think that they need a comprehensive strategy. So I would agree with that. And to your point, Megan, I don't think you can treat every league with the same blueprint. The reality is that the other professional leagues, the men's leagues, they have a much more sustained history. And listen, how they've handled things have not been perfect. Okay, you want to talk about the NFL? Same NFL. We saw what they did to Colin Kaepernick, and exiling him from the league. Still have exiled them. We've seen, I mean, look in their history, like for 12 years, they banned Black players.
I mean, it's bad. It's bad, you guys. Like, it's bad.
I don't know that you want to be following the league that thought that was okay, or it took them a long time to realize that, Washington has a racist nickname. They also have another team with another racist nickname. So they're not necessarily the model of success when it comes to handling these kinds of issues. The NBA, for as much as they're regarded as being the liberal league, and while there's a tremendous amount of player empowerment in that league compared to others, they too, people forget, like in the early 2000s, they really struggled with the fact that they had a lot of players who were greatly influenced and connected to hip hop. And they also had a very, how do you take a league that is Black stylistically, in, fashion and play, and you have your marketing Black men to basically white America? How do you handle that relationship? And they came up with a dress code.
Yeah. Allen Iverson. Yeah.
Right, because of Allen Iverson.
And then we got 15 button suits.
Oh, the suits.
Yes, exactly.
Guys, the suits.
Exactly.
It's too much material.
A lot, you look at some guys like, bro, you have created an entire other person inside of this suit. This is like unbelievable. So they didn't always respond the best as well, because it is that dynamic, uncomfortable dynamic in sport where the players and the quote entertainment don't look a lot like the fans that are watching or the people that they want to invest in the league. And I would caution the WNBA to learn from these mistakes that have been made. And the one thing on some level that gives me hope that they can create a safe and an executable strategy for the league in terms of how to handle the media coverage, how to present themselves in the league, and frankly, to do a better job of maximizing this moment. I mean, I'm looking at these postseason awards, right? And when you have somebody like Asia Wilson, who has had one of the historically great seasons of all time in WNBA history, the way in which her MVP rollout was like, what are we doing? And even Caitlin Clark, I honestly thought she had won Rookie of the Year like weeks ago. Like, I didn't even realize until they put out this big thing.
Was there a press conference? Did I miss it? Like, what
did I miss
happened?
It? Right. I mean, here you have, one of the greatest rookies this league has ever seen. And certainly from an impact standpoint, maybe the most impactful player that the league has ever had. And you basically put out like a press release. And they're like, oh, by the way, she's Rookie of the Year. Like those are the things that they have got to do a lot better. Even we saw earlier this season, Maya Moore, one of the all-time greats in this league, her jersey retirement I'm sorry, did it happen? I mean, I knew it happened. How that's not a nationally televised game is beyond me. Or, you know, when they moved the WNBA game, I think it was the Connecticut game, to the Boston Celtics arena. How was that not on national TV? It sold out, right? Yep. And so there was so many misses that it felt like there was no strategy coming into this season. And now with a full offseason to prepare, they not only need to get sort of more on the ball when it comes to marketing, I think they also need to think about, how do we want this league to be presented? You know, what is our strategy in dealing with the obvious racism, the obvious homophobia, sexism, misogyny that ultimately has always been there when it comes to how this league has been presented to the public? But how do we develop a real executable strategy around making sure our players are supported, and more importantly, making sure that the storytelling around this league fits a certain message? That doesn't mean that you lose the authenticity. So I'm not suggesting they present anything that's fake. I'm just suggesting they present something that's smart.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many different ways I want to go with this. You know, I totally agree. It's like two things are true, right? The WNBA has really dropped the ball on so many things this season. We also historically haven't been afforded the leeway to grow. We're always judged based on like where the NBA is today, where the NFL is today, right? And you bring up the early 2000s. The NBA, yeah, of course, had its own growing pains. We were never allowed, it feels like we've never been allowed our own growing pains, and like an understanding from the outside world that it takes time to do all this. But one thing we have, I think our league has done a great job, is kind of, you know, hold up the activism piece. We've really hung our hat on that. That's always been our backbone. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts around, you know, this new growth, the new success, and if that's going to impact players' activism. Will they be less likely to speak on things, or will it always have to be a part of this backbone?
So that's a great question. But to address the first part of what you said, just real quickly, is that's also one of my frustrations, because you know, I encourage people, don't compare the WNBA to where the league is now after, you know, 80 years, essentially. Compare it to where the NBA was the first 30 years of its existence.
It's like their
the
brains
WNBA,
break and they can't do it.
Yeah.
It's so
they
bizarre.
can't, right, and it's way far ahead. And listen, I realize, and I'm a throw you under the bus here a little bit, Sue. I realize we're both born in the 1800s, so you get this.
That's cool.
Tough for you guys. Tough.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
I'm
we
still
were
in my
around
30s.
when...
By the way, this is my birthday special. This is going to drop on my birthday. So,
it's so even better that I made
Even
that old
better.
folks joke.
Yeah, good timing.
Great.
Good timing.
So we were, you know, around for, you know, these early inventions, fire, the horse and buggy, all those things. So I understand from an institutional knowledge standpoint, like the NBA used to be rife with drug problems. The NBA, for a while, they thought they were going to fold. And the issues the NBA faced, the WNBA never faced. And so I think when people make these comparisons, they have to keep that in mind. But it's tough in a society where everything is about recency bias. And like, I've been arguing with people, you know, as of this recording, about how the narrative around the WNBA playoff ratings have been. And frankly, that narrative is terrible. Like, you know, I understand that Caitlin Clark's last playoff game, it drew 2.5 million viewers. That's an amazing number, particularly when we're looking at the fact that this is arguably the biggest part, the busiest part of the sports calendar. And the Aces in Liberty Game 1 drew 930,000 viewers. That is great, especially, again, busiest part of the sports calendar. And they're up against the NFL, and they were on ESPN too. There was like a lot of factors, and to still get that number, and it peaked at 1.2 million. That is incredible.
It's a record.
That same
it was
game,
a semifinal record.
Yeah, that's a record for a semifinal game, right? That to me is the headline. Instead, all the headlines are tremendous WNBA playoff drop off in ratings, you know, from Caitlin Clark's game to this one. I'm like, guys, you know that, like, more people watch the Lakers than the Denver Nuggets. I doubt if you would see a headline that says the Denver Nuggets playoff drop off. It's like you would never see that,
happen.
right?
Never.
It would never happen.
And
it's
they
like,
understand it. And they're like, oh yeah, of course Of course, LeBron gets more eyeballs.
Of course. Like, guess what? More people watch games with LeBron in them than without them. That's like not new, all right?
Right.
You know, if you had a finals of LeBron versus Steph again, well, you can't because they're both in the West, but if you did, a lot of people will watch that, all right? If you have players that are not as popular, it will be a drop-off. That's how it works. But that doesn't mean that the number is bad. Do you know how hard it is to get almost 1 million people to watch anything these days? Very difficult. So I say all that, you know, to say like, you know, the framing is still very much an issue. And so, like you said, when you start, I hate that people use the presence of men's sports to denigrate women, which only lets me know that you didn't care about women's sports to begin with.
Exactly.
You're just kind of using it as that. Now, as I get on my soapbox, I totally forgot what your second question was about. Players' activism. Okay, so this is something I do worry about, even though I've seen consistently women, you know, female athletes, period, but especially women in this league have always been 10 toes down. But I do worry about whether or not, as more money is invested, if that is going to temper a little bit of that spirit. I know that it is different from this respect than the men. It's like, I think men are used to having a certain amount of place of importance in sports, right? Yeah. Women are not. So because of that, it's ingrained in you to fight for your dignity, your respect, for your sense of place from the moment you start playing. Like, that's a fight you've always had to wage. And so it becomes a part of your DNA. But I think ultimately, as there is more investment and more investors, and it depends on the type of investors as well, is that there's probably going to come that day where there's going to have to be some business decisions made. And I do wonder, especially considering how much sweat equity the players have put in this league, if the compromises starts. At first it starts a little and then it kind of grows. And I'm certainly not accusing the players in the league of lacking any sense of integrity. Like, I don't think they're going to sell out. But the truth is that sometimes the quote selling out happens as a death of 1,000 paper cuts, by little ways that you make concessions that eventually you look up and suddenly there's so much money in it. And you say to yourself, like, I don't know if I can still come out there and be as outspoken as I once was, because I have this much that's at stake. And it doesn't get talked about enough. We see it a lot when you talk about male athletes. There's a lot of women in the league supporting their families. They, just like it is for men. Yeah. And so they're inevitably, for all of us who are in a high profile position where we've been allowed to make, money, is that you get confronted with these compromising choices all the time. And I hope the spirit of that isn't lost, because, we sort of saw what happened on the NBA side as well. Like, I think there was a long period where athletes sort of took the Michael Jordan approach a little bit, where, Republicans buy sneakers too. We got to lay off, because if we want to be a global brand, this is part of what comes with it. Or I should say, the activism looks differently. Rather than a lot of talking and speaking to these issues, it becomes writing checks for causes that aren't polarizing, instead of like writing checks to say Black Lives Matter or organizations that support that, it's writing checks to the police fund. It's that's kind of little by little how those things happen. I'm hoping not. But I guess part of, unfortunately, being a journalist and being born in the 1800s is that the pessimism outweighs the optimism. So I hope not, but that's kind of a major concern for me as well.
It has fallen on the players because brands, the leagues, the sponsors, media haven't done their fair share of it. And so my hope is that, the players keep doing it, and all the people who I just said, all the entities, continue to do it and do it even more, so that maybe like all the time the players don't necessarily have to do as much. I mean, I think you say this all the time, in that we would have loved to shut up and dribble. Like, we would have loved to just play some basketball, but nobody ever allowed them to play basketball. So I just want to make that point. It's like, maybe with the growth and the, the investment, and hopefully, people be more educated on narratives, there won't be such a need for players to speak out in the, frequency or the level which they always have. But I wanted to go back to one thing that you were talking about, just the second nature comfortability of negative narratives. You mentioned the game at TD Garden. That game actually would have been incredible because it didn't have Caitlin Clark in it. And I only say that to show it's everybody. The league is lit. Everybody watches women's sports. Everybody likes the WNBA. Barclays is sold out. TD Garden is sold out. Like Climate Pledge is sold. There's so many places that are sold out. And so there's so much that happens with, these kind of like, people are just saying like, well, people are saying, or like the narratives, which really is probably like trolls and bots and shit that is like into the meta narrative. How do you, as a journalist, like and we saw it with, Christine Brennan, I think was a good example of this, and her coverage of the WNBA this year, but then specifically with the Dejanay Carrington thing. Like, how do you as a journalist, and you've dealt with this for a very long time, whether it's like your own activism or your own history or covering the NFL while Colin was blackballed, how do you like understand the meta narratives, but then also just be like, no, this is not what's happening? Or how do you even think about that?
So one thing I think you're charged to do as a journalist is that you don't let the public set the narrative. You let the truth set the narrative. And unfortunately, with Christine, who I admire deeply, and she has, she was covering women's sports when there was nothing in it to gain. Okay.
Yeah.
And she has been one of the leading writers when it has come to helping us contextualize, shape, and celebrate what is women's sports. But she got caught up in a Twitter narrative, I mean, to be honest. Oh. And it made me, her line of questioning made me question whether or not she'd actually seen the game. Because just because people are slowing it down in slow-mo on Twitter, like literally in slow-mo, you can prove anything. You can prove it was 3 shooters on the grassy knoll. You can prove like any of that, right? Okay. But when you watch that game in real time, it was like really nothing. It was just like, oh, she swiped at the ball. She accidentally poked her in the eye. Happens 9 billion times in any basketball game. But because there is a narrative already set that the players in the league don't like Caitlin Clark, they resent her, they're jealous of her, then I've never seen a fouls on a player, everyone scrutinized to this degree. It is just like, what are we doing? Like, so that was already a narrative that was set. And certainly people have accused Christine of establishing this narrative in her columns long before she started asking that question. And so to then follow up the question by saying, by asking Dejanay if her and Mabry were laughing at the play
3 quarters later.
3 quarters later, like, how would they be laughing at that? So it's like you answered your own question. So like that shouldn't have even been a question at all. So I was sort of disappointed to see her kind of fall for it. And the reality is that as a journalist, that's a no-no, is that no, you don't allow the public to set the narrative. That's what makes journalism so important, is that we're supposed to be the disruptors. We're supposed to be not telling you things you feel like telling you the things sometimes that you don't want to know, or the truths that you can't necessarily handle. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean those are all bad truths, but like the whole point of our existence in this profession is to tell the truth and let that in itself be enough for people to form their own opinions. And even if you're an opinion columnist, as she is, and you're setting perspective and narrative, it has to be something that's still rooted in truth. And so too much of the coverage of the WNBA has been about responding to or advancing thoughtless opinions on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And I realize that social media has become a very powerful vehicle. A lot of journalists, like journalism's back is against the wall. Like, all right, I mean, it's really basically on life support at this point. And so because of that, I think there's so much more pressure on journalists to get eyes on their work as opposed to tell the truth. And when the eyes on your work becomes more important than telling the truth, then you're going to find yourself compromising a lot in how you cover things. And listen, there's a lot of media outlets that simply do not have the money to invest in journalism to do it the way that I was brought up in this profession to do it. Like, I recently, I'm sure you guys have heard it as well. Like I listened to Christine's conversation with Sarah Spain, my former colleague at ESPN, which I thought it was like a great and excellent conversation. One of the things that Christine said in there is very true, is that when it comes to Olympics coverage, first of all, a lot of media outlets can't afford to cover the Olympics because it's usually in another country. You're putting journalists up for like almost a month. I mean, I've done 2 Olympics. I did the Summer Olympics in Athens in 2004. I did the Winter Olympics in Torino, Italy in 2005. It's very expensive to cover the Olympics. And so they're going to make choices. They're going to say, you know what, the women's basketball team, they always win. So we're not going to cover them. Like they always win. Like, and you find this in women's sports and generally, sometimes they use the success and the dominance to justify not covering.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. It's like, oh, Simone Biles always wins. Why would we send a reporter? It's like, what? She's the greatest gymnast ever. That's why you do it. And so because newspapers and media outlets are often forced to make money decisions, that has completely compromised the level of coverage. And it's much easier to sit on Twitter all day and see what people are talking about and then use that to frame the stories. It's like, no, you don't let the public tell you to frame the story. You frame the story by actually doing some reporting. That's how the shit works, right? And so, and I get it that like, again, everybody's not in the position to do that. But what you wind up doing is you wind up completely missing obvious context clues about what is going. So like the negative narratives around this moment in the WNBA become far juicier than what is actually happening either through the basketball or through how players feel. Like, I mean, I've challenged so many people on social media who say like, oh, the players are jealous. What's your evidence of that? I'm not saying that like nobody across the WNBA isn't feeling, I can't speak to every single player that's playing, but is that the dominant thing? I would say no. And all the positive comments that other players say about Caitlin Clark get completely disregarded or never reported on whatsoever. And then something that is very minor, what I consider to be minor, all of a sudden becomes a very big deal. Like, yes, I mean, Breonna Stewart won 4 national titles. So, yeah, she's allowed to have the opinion that, yes, you got to have a title.
Yeah.
You need to win in order to be in my group, okay?
Exactly.
Like that is not a controversial opinion. That's not a disrespect to Caitlin Clark. That is simply her opinion. And once again, how much do we see this debated on the men's side? Like literally all the time. Okay. The ring conversation is the most dominant conversation in men's sport. But suddenly when it's in the field of women, it's about pettiness and jealousy. I was like, guys, we got to get smarter than this. That is my hope. But unfortunately, you know what I mean? It's literally. Like, unfortunately, there were just so many moments with the overall coverage where I was like, oh God, the stupid people won. This is just,
I know. And we didn't have enough. And the issue is we don't have enough of the smart people, meaning the people that are like tapped in, clued in, have research, have been covering the WNBA to offset that. That's something we've talked about a lot, just that ecosystem of not having the offset to be like, no, slow down, calm down. It was dominated.
Well, I'm sure you can obviously attest to this. When you think about how few full-time WNBA writers there are, there's not a lot because newspapers and media outlets, they made the conscious decision a long time ago not to spend resources on putting full-time beat reporters on these teams. And that in itself is really showing up. It's that, because you deprived them of resources before and you made business decisions before, that's why you're in this moment where you don't have enough people to cover games, where you don't have people you can lean on and say, oh, they've been covering this team for X amount of time. There's like a handful of writers and, people who are, on other digital platforms and television platforms that have covered this league consistently. It's just not that many. And, that's why I'm hoping that because of Caitlin Clark, that's going to force them to put more value in covering the league. And that's when you don't get bad narratives like you're talking about. But, everything we're talking about to some degree is like kind of journalism 101, is that like you as you're thinking about what you want to write or even what you want to say, is that like there's some reporting that you have to do. Even in a opinion column, there is some reporting and some kind of evidence you have to use to support what is your opinion. And so these days, and I think we see very similar things happening in our political coverage, is that unfortunately, there's a lot of access journalism, which is bad. Like when your story is changing based off who's giving you access and who's saying yes to the interview, that's a bad idea. And there's also allowing social media to become your editor is terrible. Like you cannot write to social media because I don't know if people have noticed, not the brightest people are always on social media.
No, not even real people.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like you might
be
be allowing, you might be allowing like a farm of Russian bots to sit up here and tell you that something is happening that's not actually happening.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen in our political coverage how a false narrative that starts on social media, i.e. what happened with Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, started from a Facebook post. Okay. And the lady talking about some Haitians stole her cat had just taken a simple vacation and came back. But by that time, the media was running with it.
Cat was like,
and so
I need
that's
a break.
why you don't, you know what I'm saying? And you know what? Given some of the same things I've seen on this lady's Facebook page, I don't blame the cat. That's all I got to say. I don't blame the cat, right?
Cat took a break.
Fox Creative.
This is advertiser content from L'Oreal Paris.
One thing people should know about me is I'm a fiery redhead through and through.
Ashley Rhodes Quarter, fiery redhead, fierce advocate, L'Oreal Paris Woman of Worth.
So even as a young child growing up in the foster care system, I always had a drive to be a voice for those who otherwise wouldn't have one.
Ashley is the director of the Foundation for Sustainable Families, an organization that bridges service gaps for children and families navigating the foster care system.
So much of the work that we do is rooted in that idea of giving families and individuals the tools that they need to be sustainable for themselves and for the community at large.
Each year, L'Oreal Paris launches a nationwide search for 10 extraordinary nonprofit leaders to be named Women of Worth. Each honoree receives $25,000 to support their charitable cause, mentorship from the L'Oreal Paris Network, and a national platform to amplify their stories and their work. For Ashley and the Foundation for Sustainable Families,
being a part of the L'Oreal Paris Women of Worth program allowed for us to double the amount of therapists and providers that we have for children, as well as double the number of families that we were serving.
Ashley has dedicated herself to making sure that vulnerable children have many people in their court to remind them that they are worthy of safety, care, and love.
That L'Oreal Paris has a Women of Worth program is so incredible because it showcases all of the different ways that women truly are worthy, that the children and families that we serve in our programs are worthy.
Learn more about Ashley Rhodes Quarter, the Foundation for Sustainable Families, and about this year's recipients at womenofworth.com. I just want to go back to the Breanna Stewart thing for a second, because to your point, I'm really just doubling down on it. The lack of beat writers, the lack of coverage in our world, in the world of women's basketball, 4 national championships is the standard. That's not the case for men's basketball, really for any other
anything.
So like that is the bar. So in another world, it's like, oh, if you get to the Final Four championship game twice, that's an amazing. By the way, it is an amazing feat. It's not to take away from what Caitlin did.
It's just not as amazing as
4
Stewie.
national championships in a row. But if we had people talking about that, right, in this nuanced way, then the conversation changes. But you bring up something else, which is obviously basketball. Then we've got politics, social media. Do you, I follow you on social media, and I find that you have a really wonderful way of navigating, right? Like what's true and what's bullshit. Navigating what you believe in, what you understand. Maybe if you research, that's really where my question's going, versus like, oh, this is just a bot. This is just a troll. I'm not going to push that narrative. How do you navigate that?
It's tough because the bots are getting smarter to some degree. Mm-hmm. And if people aren't aware of this already, when it comes to, these bots, like they're very specifically attack marginalized communities. Like that is their that is sort of their Super Bowl, right? And it's been written about, the research is there, the evidence is there that certainly in these last 2 presidential campaigns, they target people of color. Like that's where, kind of the where a lot of it is. It does get really, really difficult, especially because it's so easy for people to get programmed. A lot of people don't trust mainstream media. It is a trust that, frankly, that they broke. And so I do understand why they don't. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get that horse back into the barn where there is more trust in journalism. But I would say the trust overall in our industry is at an all-time low. And it's a reputation that we deserve and have frankly earned. So I don't know how to some degree, undo a lot of that damage. And what has helped me, especially in terms of deciding what content I want to promote or say like, hey, this is really good, or hey, you guys should pay attention to this. Some of the best journalism being done now is by a lot of independent journalism organizations. And, like the Brett Favre welfare story was broken by an independent journalist, citizen-supported organization. So a lot of the nonprofit journalism organizations are really, really good. I think it's Mississippi Today. I believe that was who broke the Brett Favre story. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge, especially when you look at who owns a lot of mainstream media. I know everybody has this idea that certain networks are liberal, or I mean, we definitely know who the conservative ones are because they wear loudly and proudly. But the other organizations, be it CNN or MSNBC, when you start to look at who's on their board, when you start to look at who has the majority of shares, these are not liberal people. And that inevitably bleeds down to the coverage because they are making certain decisions based off how they believe. I mean, the whole reason Elon Musk bought Twitter is because he wanted to frankly be a part of the misinformation vehicle that clearly wanted to prop up Donald Trump. So here you have one of the most influential social media machines in the world being bought by basically a Bond villain. And, this is the end result of it. That's why it's like the Wild Wild West. He's also completely tanked the value of it. And I think he was okay with that concession as long as it got him the person that he has in office. So this is, while I sometimes when young journalists ask me about this business, I'm not even quite sure what to say. I was like, I want them to be in the business because I want them to try to change some of the destructive things that are happening. But at the same time, I'm also like, I don't know if I can convince you to join a shit show. It's just kind of hard for me to do that. But if somebody doesn't wear the cape, then it'll be harder for things to change. But, for me, like trying to weave and navigate in a world of journalism and information, not even just journalism that I don't recognize, is incredibly difficult. And what I have to remind myself to do as much as I can is that those narratives, especially the false ones and the ones filled with misinformation, they hold up less when you're talking to real people. They hold up far, that to me is still where the truth lies, is when you actually are able to hit the ground, do some actual reporting in which you talk to real people. That, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to younger journalists is like, yo, man, don't do text interviews, call people. Show up in their spaces, because you get a much different read and feel. And, frankly, if you didn't get in this profession to actually talk to people face to face, then I don't know why you joined it. So that is I can go on a rant for another hour about that, is that, they're also, because of social media, it's encouraged journalists to be far more removed from the people that they're covering. And I think that's had a dramatic impact on the type of coverage we're seeing across anything from sports to politics to even entertainment.
We could literally talk about this, to your point, for another hour. We're so appreciative of your time. But before we let you go, we do want to have a little fun with you. We like to play bench, start, cut on this show.
Okay. This is the sanitized version of this.
Exactly.
In terms of the title.
Yes.
This is a yes.
Yeah. If you watched our IG live show from the pandemic,
it's FMK.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I know. I watched it.
We had to change it up. The first one has to do with sports. So here we go. Bench, start, cut. Michigan State football winning a title. The Detroit Shock coming back. The 49ers winning the Super Bowl.
Oh, man. You guys get to the heart of it. All right.
We really do. We're ruthless.
So, all right. I'm going to say a start would be Michigan State football winning the national title. We haven't done it since the late, or in the mid-'60s, excuse me.
The Spartans.
Yep. And back in the Bubba Smith days, Duffy Doherty, because we rattled off a bunch of national championships because Michigan State was actually one of the first schools in the Big Ten to recruit Black players. And so that's how we won. And
That's right.
So yes, I would love it because that also means, see, sometimes, and in politics, they figured this out because sometimes it's not, it's also about you winning, but also about you sort of destroying your rival in the process. So I know by us winning the national title, that immediately means that Michigan's in a bad way. And I would love to inflict as much punishment as possible on them. So they would be my starter. My bench would be the Detroit Shock coming back. I would love to see this happen.
Cool.
I really would. About the legacy of the Shock. They had one of the most improbable runs in sports history because I think the Shock still remain the only team in sports history to go from last place to winning the title the next year. And it's, I think, a forgotten legacy in the WNBA history. Because that team did not fit what the WNBA wanted the image of the league to be. And free plug, I'd love to do a documentary on this. So in fact, if anybody's interested in a documentary on this, holler at me because listen, I got some things in place. Ladies,
making deals right here. I think we're making deals.
Yeah, I'm saying, and we can talk about this off air because I got some stuff. So I would love to see the Shock return, especially now because when they were winning, the arena was located in Auburn Hills, which is about 45 minutes from Detroit. Now, the Pistons, they play in downtown Detroit, where the Lions play the Tigers. We have all the major sports downtown. And so I think that would be huge if they ever return to Detroit. Unfortunately, I have to cut my 49ers because we have won multiple Super Bowl titles.
They already did it.
I know. We've done it. And listen, we haven't done it since 92. And it's been painful to watch us lose these Super Bowls. Trust me. But at least I can say, there's a history there of having done it. So unfortunately, they would be the sacrificial lamb.
Fair. Okay. We got this. We're going to limit you to one-word answers, but we got a good one. Well, I think it's a good one. Your WNBA white hoodie, your orange WNBA hoodie, or your tie-dye looking WNBA hoodie.
Ooh.
You rock the hoodies hard, and we love that.
I do. And I have all three of those. So I am going to start the orange hoodie. I'm going to bench the white one. And unfortunately, I'm going to cut the tie-dye.
I'm
it's
with
much
that.
harder
That
to
feels
match.
right.
No, tie-dye's out.
That feels right.
I totally agree.
Tie-dye's
That
out.
pocket is
Tie-dye's
really
hard to
big.
match.
Yeah.
The pocket is both a good and a bad
whole
thing.
thing.
It's a
Yes.
lot. It's a lot.
Yes.
I'm like, what's in there? Jemele, thank you so much for joining us. This was an amazing conversation. We appreciate all your time and just all your work in the world. And hopefully we'll see you in real life.
And we're going to circle back
soon.
on that Detroit Shock doc.
Yeah. We're coming
Holla
right
at me.
off. Right,
I
as
got
soon as
treatment,
this recording
everything.
ends.
Holla at me.
Done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. God, that was amazing.
Great.
I love Jemele Hill so much.
So good.
We
didn't even have to ask the question. I had all these questions.
She
just
answered
answered
all
all
the
of them.
questions. Amazing.
It was amazing.
It's like she's a journalist. It's crazy. Thank you again, Jemele. That was awesome. Jemele has a new podcast coming out on the iHeartRadio called Spolitics, all about sports and politics, dropping October 17th. So absolutely click, subscribe, do all the buttons. Check it out. We're really excited about that. This leads us right into our little birthday surprise for Sue. One thing that I have learned about Sue in 8 years is that she's just a basic bee when it comes to everything. And in the best of ways, you are just such a cute little fat kid.
Oh,
and
what's happening?
Wouldn't you like to know?
Cake?
And so for your birthday
Chip-witches?
surprise,
Ice cream sandwiches?
Don't do this.
Okay.
For your birthday surprise, we got you a little birthday cake.
Aww.
And if we may, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, babe.
Thank you. I think you got to go get the cake.
Okay. I'm coming. Okay, hopefully my thing doesn't flip out.
No, you're good. Okay, I
We
can handle
got
this kind of
you
surprise.
An ice cream cake.
I love.
that
Does it have
has,
crumbles in it? The crunchies?
I'm not exactly sure what's inside of it, but that
Cookies and
is
cream?
cookies and cream.
Oh, I knew
We have been together for 8+ years. We
Mhm.
have been to ice cream an innumerable amount of times, mostly at Molly Moon's down the street in Seattle. Sue has never not one time, although she threatens every single time, has never not one time ordered anything other than cookies and cream. Sue, happy birthday, babe.
Yay.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
This is bomb.
I
I
bet.
mean, I got right in there.
I mean, you sure did. Which one? Do you think I'll like the sorbet one? I bet.
Probably.
Sue's always
Well,
like,
thank
get
you,
the
everybody.
wreath. Yeah, this was
What a nice little birthday surprise.
Yeah, thank you to our producer Jasmine for putting this all together, and Nishad and everybody here and everybody in the Touch More
Thank you.
group chat. Thank you, everybody, and happy birthday, babe.
Thanks. 44.
That
44.
exact kind of sorbet that I like.
I know. I just want these cookies and cream ones.
All right, everybody. See you next week.
I'll be eating this till then.
Bye. Thanks to L'Oreal Paris for their support. What does "because you're worth it" mean to you? We heard from Ashley Rhodes-Quarter earlier in the episode that every human being deserves to feel worthy, that helping others feel worthy is vital. L'Oreal Paris knows that everyone deserves that feeling. Whether it's inspiration from our Women of Worth honorees or the confidence you feel after applying the classic Color Riche lipstick, L'Oreal's got your back. When you know you're worth it, you inspire others to know that they're worth it too. Learn more at l'orealparis.com.